Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss the question, is this Astralis lineup, the one that's played the bulk of 2018 together, already the greatest team of all time? And the reason why I asked this question is because a lot of chatter came out about Astralis already being the greatest team of all time whenever they won the Intel Grand Slam, winning the EPL Season 8 finals. And obviously, Sadeclist had the famous speech kind of at the end of the game where he said they were the greatest of all fucking time or something along those lines. And obviously, that got really popular on Reddit. And this really started the conversation across social media that Astralis was indeed the greatest of all time in CSGO. And so I kind of wanted to look at that question a little bit deeply and find out, is that true? Are they really already the greatest team of all time? And I think it's really important to emphasize right at the top, and something I'm probably going to reiterate throughout this video, either in the middle or towards the end, that they aren't done yet. Like, this lineup is still together. They still, for the foreseeable future, look like the best team in the world right now. It doesn't seem like anyone's able to consistently contest them. Seems like one-off results whenever someone actually does get a best-of-3 victory or best-of-5 victory over them these days. They rarely drop maps just in general. No one really has a head-to-head record over them except for that North lineup that fluked them at DreamHack Masters Stockholm. You know, no one else really goes toe-to-toe with them on a regular basis. And so for the foreseeable future, going into the next major and going into the early portion of 2019, they don't really seem to be any true challengers to Astralis. So there doesn't seem to be much stopping them from racking up even more top 4 finishes, even more titles. They're probably the favorite to win the next major coming up here at IEM Katowice, which is going to be, taking place in the early part of next year. So they're not done yet. They could easily become an even greater team to be the greatest team of all time as far as, beefing up their resume or what have you. So I think it's really important to note that they aren't finished yet, whereas any lineup you're going to compare them to has already had their run. They are already over. They have already made roster moves or have moved on in life or whatever the case may be. And so it makes it hard to compare when this team's still going. I probably will make a video after the team maybe makes a move or decides to change or someone retires or something. Maybe then I'll make a video to kind of finalize, where they really do rank amongst all the teams in the world that have competed over CSGO's history. But yeah, it's really important to note that they aren't done yet. So let's kind of look, though, at what they look like right now, what they've looked like throughout this year, and what accomplishments they've already gained, and how does that stack up, perhaps, to some of the other teams that, you would argue are the greatest of all time or are up there. So currently, Astralis, if you collect all their results since Magius joined the team, they have played a total of 15 LAN events together as a team thus far, which is, of course, coming off the back of winning the Intel Grand Slam at EPL Season 8. They will still be attending Blast Lisbon. So they still do have one more bigger tournament to go before 2018 ends. Obviously, they got the major coming up after that. Not really sure there's anything coming up between then and the next major. Maybe they will be at iPower Masters. It's a pretty big $200,000 event in North America. Maybe they decide to go to that since they don't need to worry about the minors. Maybe they skip out on it and just wait until the major. After Lisbon, not really sure. But for right now, this lineup has been to 15 events. Out of the 15 events they've played at, they've made the finals 11 times, and they've won 9 of those 11 finals. So 2 second-place finishes or better in 11 out of 15 events. They have 4 other top 4 finishes, and so therefore, of the 15 events, they've only placed outside of the top 4 a single time, and of course, that was their top 8 finish, which was their first event together with Magius, which was the Starlighter Season 4 finals. And when you really think about it, to make it a little bit sexier, their first 2 events together were one of the top 4 finishes and the top 8 finish. So once they kind of got their rhythm with Magius and got used to playing with him and they got their system in order and everything like that, when you really look at it, in the last 13 events is when they made those 11 finals and won 9 of those titles. So that makes it even crazier when you think about, like, once they kind of solidify themselves as a team, this is what we've really seen over the last 13 events is 11 finals appearances. So that's pretty crazy stuff. So that is awesome. Currently, right now, they lead in pretty much any team statistical category you can think of when it comes to round win percentage, especially on the CT side. Their round win percentage on CT side is about 9 percentage points higher than any other team right now when you filter for top 30 teams. Overall, they have a 5% lead in round win percentage. They also lead in categories like multi-kill rounds, 5-on-4, conversions, 4-on-5 conversions. They are way up there in utility damage. They had a substantial lead in utility damage. Some other teams have kind of caught up as the years trudged on, but they lead in all these categories. They have opening duel lead as well. So all these different team statistical categories right now, they are certainly at the top at. Currently, as we sit, all 5 of their players are in the top 15 for HLTV rating for the year. You have to kind of filter for like top 30 teams and kind of count some outlier players and things like that may play only in smaller tournaments. But when you think about, the bigger events like, tier 2, tier 1 events, top 30 teams in the world, when you filter for all that, all 5 of their players are in the top 15 for overall rating for the year. If you count ties, because, some players have the exact same rating as each other, then you basically have Device, who's number 2. You have Dupree, who's number 6, who's apparently tied with Cole and Ethan. You have Macius at number 7. You have Glaive at number 9, who's tied with Mert, Cirque, Breezy, and Twist. And then you have Zipix, who is number 11, tied with Guardian. So 4 of their 5 players are actually in the top 10 for overall HLTV rating, and then Zipix is not too far away at number 11. The only best in 3s or best of 5 series that they have lost are to North twice at Stockholm, Navi at the Cologne semifinals, FaZe at the Sydney finals, and FaZe at the Katowice semis, as well as Navi at the Starlighter Season 4 quarterfinals. So they have only lost just a handful of best of 3 or best of 5 series. There's only 2 instances throughout this year where they were completely shut out of the best of 3 or best of 5, so got 0-2 or 0-3. And those were both to FaZe, won the series at Sydney in the finals, and then, of course, at the Katowice semifinals. Their overall record in maps right now for the year, again, they still need to play Lisbon, so this is not going to be completely up to date if you're looking at the end of the year, but they are having 118 wins and 34 losses. That is a ridiculous win-loss record. Of the 34 map losses they have, only 7 times had they been denied double digits. So even when they lose, it's typically very close games. A lot of them have been overtime losses or 14-16 losses, maybe 13-16 losses. Hell, there's only been a few times they've been denied less than, 13 rounds or something like that. Like, it is just insane. And no team outside of the North lineup that played them at the DreamHack Masters Stockholm event, which has looked like a fluke when you think about things since, have a series advantage or map advantage over this team as far as results go. So they are just dominating. So these are just their results, their statistics. But when you go to an eye test, Astralis looks like one of the best run teams that the world has ever seen in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. They have a fantastic system where you have someone like Glaive, who is a mixture between an entry fragger paired up with Dupree for an entry duo, as well as being a guy who can certainly support, has really good statistics for flash assist and flash success and things like that to set up teammates. And obviously is, of course, a monster in-game leader when it comes to, coming up with set strategies to run early round, coming up with mid-round reads and rotations, coming up with how to approach the late round. Just a mastermind of Counter-Strike. Obviously, Zonic as a coach certainly helps them come up with utility. I know he's a guy that's kind of pushed like some of the nade stacks and probably helped them learn some of the smokes and flashes they know. But certainly Glaive will go down as one of the best in-game leaders of all time. Probably one of the best fragging in-game leaders of all time as well. Like the only one I could even think of that you would consider to be a classical in-game leader, but also a really good fragger would be Fallen, during his tenure at Luminosity and SK over the course of mostly 2016. Certainly you would put him up there. And there's certainly a lot of in-game leaders, fraggers that were kind of in-game leaders by necessity, like a Tarek or a Stewie2K or a Nico or a Shox that you would certainly put in that category. But when you think of true in-game leaders, it really is like Glaive and Fallen of some of the greatest fragging in-game leaders of all time. So you have that role really well established as, a leader of men, a leader of tactics, and a guy who can actually put up really big numbers. So that role is super solidified for Astralis, more so than almost any other team currently. Then you have Dupree, who is an other entry fragger, but is also quite versatile, has at times primary opt when they needed him to when Device had to step out for illness. He is obviously a really dangerous secondary opper as well to use when need be. So just a super good player, and he probably is right now currently the strongest pure entry rifler in the world. Certainly Sonny from Mousesports is up there. There's plenty of playmakers out there that do create openings for their teams, like an Electronic and Simple over at Navi, for example, like guys like Elige, Twist, and stuff over at Team Liquid. But when you think about pure entry rifling, Dupree certainly ranks up at number 1 right now and is all-time one of the best entry fraggers we've seen in CSGO. Device is one of the greatest oppers we have ever seen. He certainly fulfills that role. He's not always the flashiest. He is so damn consistent creating numbers. He is so dynamic. When you look at the heat maps of how he moves across the map, how he varies up his starting location, how he moves throughout and around once he gets a pick to make sure that he is just, all over the place, and it makes it so hard for you to read where he's going to be. He is just a master of that role, not just from a pure fragging perspective. He definitely puts up the numbers. When you just think about his approach, his movement, his philosophy, just the way he reads the game, moves himself around, definitely has that role well solidified. And then you have your two peripheral players, or like solo spot players, players who kind of hold zones by themselves on a default. Xyp9x, of course, being the main one, at times a lurk, at times creating pressure. Very clutch player, because of course he's going to be in a lot of late round situations because he's on the edge of the map, and he is a master of that. He is so good in that role. Then you have Magius, who has come in to be the other solo role edge of the map type player, flexible on whether he's going to be aggressive and actually be a part of the attack, whether he's going to kind of sit back and be more of a passive rifling factor. Great in certain anchor spots on the CT side as well. Puts up fantastic numbers. Definitely was that missing piece that seemed to perfect the system Astralis needed to really have a sharp default and really be on the road to being one of the greats. So yeah, the roles are super well established, and what I've described is really only their T-side roles. When you think about how some of these guys can anchor bomb sites, like what Magius can do on the A bomb side of Mirage, for instance, or like what Xyp9x can do on multiple different maps where he does anchoring, their team play within a CT round, how they rotate, how they bounce off each other, and really just their team play, how it extends across the entire game, even just how they work mid-round situations in 3-on-3s, how they bounce off each other, how they throw their utility together, how sharp their timings are, just how they trade off of one another. They just look so damn good, and it's because they have this great foundational default with those well-established roles I've described, where they know how to approach the early stage of every round. They know what to do. They have that flow chart built in of how to approach each stage of the round. And then on top of having that sick default that they can mid-round from, they do have these really, really great tactics they can use to change up the pace, to do these faster attacks on bomb sites. They do have those gimmicky triple nade stacks on certain locations of the map to get a kill or to open up something, to push someone off. The way that they use their flashbangs, again, they have some of the best flash assisting and success statistics that exist in CSGO, and several of their players, like a Glaive, like some of these other guys, like Xyp9x, are up there individually for those types of numbers. I mean, they are just the most complete strategical team in CSGO history, or one of them at the very least. I think there is one you could kind of compare, which I'm going to do here in a second, where they just can play any type of CS. They can play the slow methodical default. They can play fast paced. They can throw in innovative execute. So just from an eye test perspective, how they approach the game is just fantastic. I could go on forever about their tactics, but I want to kind of keep this video somewhat shorter, so I don't want to go heavy into detail on every single map, every single tactic that they have, but their playbook is just so deep and their foundation is just so great. And alongside that deep playbook is that deep map pool. Just so fantastic across the entire map pool. The only weaknesses they really have are cash, which is basically no games played since May of 2018. It's still a positive win rate on that map, by the way. They have a 4-3 record. Then their only other weaknesses are overpass to a degree, at least recently. They have a 16-7 overall record, so great overall for the year, but they have lost the last 4 out of 7 games against multiple different opponents, so it doesn't seem like overpass has shipped a little bit. Their train also has, kind of faded a little bit. Overall an 8-5 record, but they have lost the last 3 times they have played it offline, so that seems to be weakening a little bit. But again, these maps that I'm calling weak points are still maps they have positive win rates on, especially overpass. I still think that's a really great map for this team. But let's look at the other maps, right? 27-0 on Nuke. This is the second longest map winning streak offline in CSGO history, the longest in the last 5 years, and the only person that is up there with them is, of course, NIP, who had won Nuke 32 times in a row in that 2012-2013 kind of time frame. So phenomenal on Nuke. Definitely making history on that map. Could eventually break NIP's record at some point. 18-8 on Mirage. Fantastic on Mirage. This used to be one of their weaker points. They had a little bit of a rough patch, I'd say like maybe August to like middle of November or so. But they've actually really picked it up. They've won the last 5 out of 6 times they've played it. So they've really kind of adjusted their Mirage and have a great overall record for the year, and have really kind of made some strides in recent times to kind of patch it up, even though they were having a bit of a rough patch for a little bit. Then they are 34-10 on Then they are 34-10 on Inferno, and it's important to note that they lost their first 4 games they ever played together on Inferno, 3 of which were in their first event together as a team at Star Ladder. So if you take that out of the equation, recently they are, 34-6 on Inferno since those first couple of events together. And then they're 11-1 on Dust 2. So just a fantastic map pool to go along with that playbook. Again, we talked about all these different statistics that they lead in. We talk about how great their players are individually. We talk about their team play, their structure. I could just go on for this forever. But just from an eye test, when you look at them play, you can just tell how great they are, how they could be, the greatest team of all time. And you add that with all their accomplishments, the trophies they've won, the top 4 finishes they've gotten, and they certainly are in the argument. So what other top lineups could we compare them to then to say, are they already the greatest of all time? Again, because they're not done yet. All these teams I'm going to compare them to are done. So to me, the only teams that really even could somewhat stack up that you would have to try to compare them to are NIP, just for the historical value, being the 87-0, being that dominant team at the very beginning of Counter-Strike Global Offensive. But to be honest, when you filter for things like the level of competition, because remember, NIP were kind of early adopters. A lot of the other European 1.6 professional players were a lot slower to transition than a lot of the NIP members were. Same could be said for some of the European source guys. So level of competition was just way different then. The map pool was different back then. I think it was a 5 map pool for the bulk of NIP's early success, not a 7 map pool. So you had less maps you had to focus on. Maps were also a lot different then. Strategy and meta hadn't really evolved very much then. So when you account for all of that, I mean, the 87-0 and the early NIP, I don't know that you could really call them the greatest of all time just because of all those different pieces of context you have to consider. They certainly will go down as one of the greatest teams of all time. They certainly will, still be very important for the history of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and everyone will always kind of look back to that. No one else is ever going to go 87-0 again or break that record. So they certainly do have their place in history, but I don't think that you can stack them up to some of the teams we've had over the years as the de facto greatest of all time. I think that they fall off. So what are a couple of other teams we could think about in the more modern era that you could compare to Astralis? I think that there's 2 that are in the running along with this Astralis team. So one of them would, of course, be the Luminosity/SK gaming team of late 2015 through 2016. Of course, it was Fallen, Fur, and Cold, which are still together to this day. This is back when they had Taco and FNX, which, remember, they kind of made a big splash at the end of 2015 at that one Face-It tournament where they got 16-0'd by Fnatic on Dust 2 in one of their opening group stage games, but then came back and ran the board and actually made it all the way back to the finals to rematch Fnatic. They lost, but it was a big second-place finish, and it was the kickstart of a crazy era of this Brazilian team. And this team attended 17 LAN events, so 2 more than what Astralis has done thus far. Now, in those 17 LAN events between November of 2015 and November of 2016, they also made 11 finals. So Astralis has already made 11 finals, 2 events faster than this LGSK team was, right? And remember, they made 11 finals out of 13 because the first 2 events were the top 4 to top 8. So that's just to kind of line it up really quick there. Now, you had this LGSK team won 5 titles, whereas, of course, we got to talk about Astralis have already won 9 titles, right? Now, 2 of those titles were majors. For Astralis, only 1 of them is a major so far. Granted, a lot of these other players have also won a major before, but that was, of course, before Majors had joined the team. So Majors only has the 1 major, and this particular lineup only has the 1 major. They're going to try to go for their second at IEM Katowice. But you also have to take into consideration that while 2 of them are majors for this LGSK lineup and only 1 of them is for Astralis, one of the titles that the LGSK lineup won was a local event in Brazil, and then one was a weaker event at a DreamHack Austin. So when you think about like tier 1 titles, Astralis has that in spades in comparison with what this lineup had. Now, this lineup also had 4 of their top 4 finishes, so they had top 4 or better in 15 out of 17 LAN events. Whereas, again, Astralis is only placed outside of the top 4 a single time. So they've gotten top 4 or better in 14 out of 15 LAN events. So when you compare the numbers there, Astralis has already surpassed them. Really, the only thing this LGSK team has over Astralis' current lineup is that 1 extra major their 5 was able to get together before they broke up. And Astralis, they'll get that opportunity, like I said, at IEM Katowice to kind of tie up that record. But that's literally the only thing that this lineup, which was one of the greatest lineups of all time in many people's opinion, that's the only category they lead them in, is that 1 extra major. Now, the other thing that this LGSK lineup had that kind of compares to Astralis is the fact that they also had a fantastic strategical system. You know, from an eye test, we talk about how Astralis might be the best team we've ever seen play Counter-Strike as far as their strategical approach. And they definitely are up there, man. And they might be number one. But even if they're not number one, then they're number two to this team. Or you could debate who's better. That could probably be like a separate piece of content that I might have to do one day. It's like, who was really better strategically? Because look, like, this team also innovated. Like, Fallen's the one who came up with that 5 smoke setup on Mirage at X Games Aspen 2015 that caught him some upset victories and blew people away. And people had to take notice, and a bunch of teams started using that 5 smoke setup on the A-bomb site on Mirage. I actually did a video about it on this YouTube channel, which you can check out if you want to sift through. Maybe I'll put it in the description below. So they started out by being a gimmicky team with some innovative tactics, and then they eventually kind of learned that slow methodical default structure, kind of akin to like what Zeus was doing with Na'Vi. And they too had really well-defined roles. Taco, usually edge of the map player, but also could be a bit of an entry fragger. Obviously FNX, more of a late round clutch type player, like what Zipix is today for Astralis. Very good rock player, could also play solo roles. You had, you know, Fallen, this really great AWP player. You know, you had Fur, this really fantastic entry fragger. You had Cold, who could do a little bit of everything. He tended to drift more towards the mid to late round. He tended to sometimes kind of play by himself and kind of lurk a little bit, but he also on other maps could be very active with Fur, taking map control, opening up bomb sites, things of that nature. So they did have really well established roles. They did have a really good approach to every single stage of the round. They knew what to do early round with their set roles and their default. They knew how to approach mid-round situations. They were good at closing out rounds. They too could innovate. I mean, I talked about the 5 smoke setup on Mirage that they did, but I mean, Fallen and company invented a bunch of cool stuff. Like, I remember they were one of the ones to start splitting the B bomb site on Cobblestone by running up the mid ramp, by smoking off the A bomb site by the APC and fighting into connector up mid slope and splitting B that way. No one else was really doing that until they did. And so they themselves were innovating alongside and mastering the default, that foundational play. So I would say that, like, the strategical approach of this Fallen team and what Astralis does today are very comparable in some ways. And I think there is a debate to be had on who really was the best strategically. I think you can make a case for either one. Maybe Astralis has the nod because they're still going. They maybe are going to do it for longer than this team did, because this team was only together for basically a year. You know, November 2015 and November 2016 before they started making roster moves. And this Astralis team is not quite at a year together yet, but they probably will be soon after the next major. And if they stick together, then they will maybe keep it going for even longer than this team did. So yeah, I think they certainly have surpassed this team in accomplishments and numbers. I don't even think it's comparable. But from an eye test on just watching them play, how good they look, I think that, like I said, there could be a debate had. The big thing that also separates them, I think, is the fact that you have 5 individuals on Astralis who are all within the top 15 of HLTV rating. This LGSK team never had that. They had certainly 3 of their 5 in the top 15. Probably even 4 of their 5 could have maybe been in the top 15 at some point. I'm not really sure. I didn't look. But, you know, obviously Taco was never up there, like, in comparison to all 5 of Astralis being up there. No knock against Taco. I'm just saying if you're going by numbers, it wasn't quite the same level of dominance across the board for all 5 players. So there's that. So then there's the other team. And this is a team that I think you theoretically could argue might still be the greatest of all time. And this is the Fnatic lineup that played together between August of 2014 and October of 2015. So they were together for basically a year and 2 months, or somewhere around that. So a little bit longer than the LGSK team we just talked about. And of course, Astralis has not hit that part yet. So numbers-wise, I think this team you could still maybe consider greater than Astralis, just from statistics. And that is because they attended 27 LAN events together between August 2014 and October of 2015. Whereas, again, we talked about Astralis, they've only been to 15 LAN events. So they're 12 events behind this Fnatic team. So that's why it's still important to emphasize that Astralis is still going. They still have events to burn before they hit this limit that this Fnatic did, and then we can really do a true comparison of the numbers. Now, this team of 27 LAN events made 18 finals, and they won 13, including 2 majors. So again, this Astralis line we're talking about now has made 11 finals and won 9. This team made 18 finals and won 13. So there's just kind of the strength comparison. This team had 7 other top 4 finishes. They made top 4 or better in 25 out of the 27 events they played together. The 2 top 8s were DreamHack winner 2014, and then the last event they played together, which was, of course, at DreamHack Cluj-Napoca in 2015 before this lineup broke up. Now, this team, by the way, also had a monster map pool. They did have a positive win rate on every single main map in the map pool. The one map that they didn't was they played one like ESEA tournament that was still using DE season where no one else really was. And so that's the one map that they had like a loss on. But I don't even really count that, to be fair. Like I think that, you know, when you look at the other 7 map pool, they did have a positive win rate on every single map, just as Astralis does. If you want to go back really quick to that LGSK lineup, they did have a negative win rate on Cash and Nuke. So they didn't have a positive win rate on every single map like Astralis does. So Astralis' overall map pool, statistically speaking, was actually a little bit better than LGSK, even though that team also did have a really deep map pool, which is one of the other reasons why, on top of their results and on top of their strategical system, they're going to be considered one of the greatest lineups of all time. So this Fnatic, 34-14 on Mirage, 36-13 on Inferno. So sick win rates on those 2 maps were pretty good on Cash and Dust 2 as well overall. Their Cobblestone record was fantastic. Their Overpass record was fantastic. And their Train was pretty comparable to Astralis, actually, like pretty similar numbers. I think they had a 9-5 record, while Astralis was 8-5. So that's actually pretty close stuff. So, yeah, when you compare it numbers-wise, this team has more top 4 finishes, has more finals appearances, has more finals victories, more titles, and they won 2 majors instead of just one together as a lineup. But again, it took 27 events for them to do it. Astralis is already approaching our numbers in 15 events, right? So when you really think about it, I mean, maybe you still argue this Fnatic team is the greatest of all time just because of their pure numbers, and maybe once Astralis hits the same number of events attended and you can do a direct comparison, then they'll finally will just undoubtedly beat them, and it wouldn't even be a debate anymore. Like Astralis would clearly be the #1 team of all time. But until then, there will be some debate there. But I think Astralis, just how fast they've done it, you could edge out this Fnatic. Also, from an eye test, we're just comparing like strategy, like how good they look together as a unit. This Astralis team, definitely tactically speaking, far superior to this Fnatic team. This team was a lot more reliant on just pure firepower, like Olaf being the best player in the world for some period of time. Krims was the best player for a period of time with this lineup. You know, Flusha was still a very stable, consistent player at the time. And again, this Fnatic team, though, man for man, not quite the same as Astralis. Again, we talk about Astralis has all 5 of their players in the top 15. For this Fnatic team, certainly Pronax wouldn't have been up there. Some of the other guys certainly were. Like I said, Olaf, Krims, Flusha, probably those 3 were in the top 15 for this era. And JW probably was up there too, or pretty close to it. But yeah, Pronax, that fragging game leader aspect, not the same in comparison to Glaive over at Astralis. And other than that, I can't really think of any other lineups I would compare to this team that's even comparable. Some people say like that Fnatic of late 2015 and 2016 when they got Dennis on the team in place of Pronax because they did win their first 6 events together in a row. But that's the only 6 titles they ever actually got. So when you think about pure number of titles, Astralis definitely has that beat. And they also didn't play that many events together. I think they played 18 events together, and this Astralis has played 15, and they placed top 4 or better in 10 out of 18 events, whereas Astralis has done that 14 out of 15 events, right? So that team, I don't think, is even comparable, and certainly they strategically weren't anywhere even near where Astralis is today or where that LGSK lineup was, so I can't really count that one, to be honest. Now, you could also throw in some of Navi's lineups over history to compare to Astralis. You know, for example, there was the one lineup that ran essentially from March of 2015 to July of 2016, which had Edward, Zeus, Guardian, Seized, and Flamey. And this team placed top 4 or better, I think 20 out of 26 events or something like that. But they didn't have as many titles as this Astralis team has. They didn't have as many finals appearances as Astralis has. And certainly they fell outside of the top 4 more often than this Astralis team has. And so, again, that team certainly did do a lot of great things and certainly will go down as one of the best teams of all time, but I think that numbers-wise, you can pretty easily say that this Astralis is better. And hey, look, the current Navi lineup right now that has this simple electronic combination with Flamey, Zeus, and Edward, this will also probably go down as one of the best teams of all time, but we've had the privilege of seeing this team play alongside the current Astralis, and so we can do a direct comparison just right away and tell that Astralis certainly has this team beat. So that's really what there is to consider, I think, of if Astralis is already the greatest of all time. You know, again, I think they did surpass LGSK on results and numbers. I think, again, strategically speaking, they're comparable, but I would probably give Astralis the nod just a little bit. When it comes to the Fnatic lineup, like of 2014 and 2015, the Pronax lineup, again, pure numbers, Fnatic has Astralis beat, but they've played way more events. And at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is I think you could give Astralis the greatest of all time right now, currently, even though they aren't done yet. I think you could. At worst, they're number 2. At worst, they're number 2 to the Fnatic 2014 and 2015 lineup. And again, the big point to make is they aren't done yet. And again, for the foreseeable future, I don't see a real big challenger to Astralis to stop them from making more finals, to stop them from getting more titles, to stop them from getting all these top 4 finishes. Who is going to stop them from winning the next major? Certainly there are some teams who are capable, that have the talent and the ability to do it, but no one's done it on a consistent basis yet. And so you always got to count Astralis to favorite going forward. And so they could rack up so much more before their time is done. So it seems inevitable that they will be the undisputed greatest of all time, as long as they stay on form, as long as something doesn't happen in a crazy fashion that kind of kills off the team, or someone has a super ridiculous slump, or, there doesn't seem to be anything that can stop them from continuing to go on. So I think it's only a matter of time before they're the undisputed greatest of all time. You could say that they already are. And like I said, at worst, they're number 2 behind that Fnatic lineup I was talking about. So yeah, just want to generate some discussion about this idea of Astralis being the greatest of all time. I would like to hear your thoughts. Maybe you can post about it and have a little bit of a discussion. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please follow and subscribe for more content. Thanks so much, and catch you next time.